What an intro we're starting with. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of What Are You? Today on episode 4, we are talking about raising / being multiracial, multi-ethnic children, and what that experience is like. And today we actually have a special guest on the show, Woo! Meredith Wadko. Woo!
I love how you pronounce my last name.
You're welcome. It's Guarco for anyone who is asking. But yeah, so Meredith, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. So my name's Meredith. I'm a CU Denver master's student. I have a focus in multicultural clinical mental health, and I graduate in December, so that's the big news.
Yeah, that's exciting. We're also in the counseling track, and we're also hoping to, graduate. Yeah.
One day.
Yeah. So Ray, do you want to explain the setup of the show today?
Yes. So Meredith, we're gonna go into your research that you provided, and then we're just gonna have our reflections as multiracial individuals, and then we're gonna kind of think in the future, because I want to be a parent, Alma wants to be a parent. We're going to be separate families, but
not together.
Not together.
For the people who are
just letting y'all know.
Sorry, that wasn't any offense.
No, it's fine.
Okay.
But yes, we're going to have our reflection of what it's going to be in the future as parents, of how our discussion is going to be with our own kids, and how weird and awkward it's going to be, but how necessary it's going to be. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll preface this by saying I am not a parent, but that is what we're hoping to achieve someday. But obviously a product of a biracial family. So a lot of the research that I've done throughout the counseling program is how to counsel biracial children. So some of the nuggets that I picked up that could be helpful to parents who are listening, students, or just those who are curious, are that basically what's important is identity development for children, but the component of that is racial identity development. And I think not many parents, and I guess I'm imposing my own experience, my own parents certainly didn't know a lot about the identity development models, and definitely not the racial component of it. So the research that I have here, it's a book called Raising Biracial Children by Carrie Rocklemore and Tracy Lasloffy, and I'm probably ruining that last name. But they have, it's a really great book because it has models on racial identity development specifically for biracial, multiracial children. And one component that they talked about that I keep hearing in parenting books that my partner and I are reading about is your home nurturing? And do you provide an environment for a child to explore their racial identity? And that ultimately does provide stability and cohesiveness. And then another point that came up that I thought was interesting was a lot of parents think that racism isn't a problem. And so that has come in a lot in some of the things that I've been reading, and it's yeah, we don't want to think that it's a problem, but the reality is it is.
It is.
So how does that impact our kids?
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't know how many parents out there, unless you study counseling or education or something like that, that are oh, she is going to this stage of development of racial identity and things like that. So and kind of similar. My parents, luckily my dad was biracial, so he kind of had an idea of how it went already, and my mom was not, so he kind of showed her how, kind of the different things that I might ask. I mean, it wasn't blatant, it wasn't until I was older that I asked. I was okay, so did you actually prepare for me coming to this world? But because kids are naturally curious anyways, and they notice. We can all probably speak from experience, just navigating the world, being young, we're not blind to how people see us, and and the fact that so many parents are oh, racism isn't a problem, you're already setting them up to either be oblivious or ignorant to it, or that they're going to be negatively affected by it and be
Yeah.
like, but I thought my parents said that this wasn't a problem.
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think like for me, just learning from like my mom and my dad, they didn't really have time to have that discussion just because they were like workaholics, they were working like nonstop. So it really took me like in my own self-search at the age of like 7 to start watching shows that like some of my friends would watch and then some others wouldn't. You know, I'd watch like Innovation for like, news because my mom had it on all the time, and like I couldn't change the channel. Like some Latinos would know like you cannot change the channel for your mom or anything like that because she'll just yell at you. And so like I would just learn to watch the news from there. So I kind of had an inkling of it, but I never really had that like connective discussion. And it was only until like my early teens, like later, early 20s, late teens, where I had a discussion with my dad. I'm like, hey dad, like, so what, can we have that discussion of like identity and stuff like that? And he was like, oh, I'm Panamanian. I was like, all right, but you're very dark skinned, so wouldn't that, mean you're black? He's like, no, I'm Panamanian. And so he's very proud of his Panamanian culture, but he wouldn't understand like the implications of me being dark skinned in a world and in a community in Virginia that was predominantly white.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, it was a total throw off, but my dad tried his best.
Yeah. And kids know. I think, you said you were like 7 when you're asking questions. I mean, when I was around that age, I remember asking my parents, am I white? And at the same time, my mom said yes, and my dad said no. And that was like the epitome of my experience.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's, so we also had Split Stories today, which is through the Center for Identity and Inclusion at CU Denver, where we talk about mixed race experiences. And Kyla, who was one of the guest speakers for it, about raising multiracial, multi-ethnic children, talked about her daughter, whose name is also Alma, which I was like, oh, there's another one. But she looks white passing, but she's white and Mexican. And so she picked a book out of the library for Juneteenth. Like she just picked it out and she learned about it and stuff. So they talked about like slavery, and she was like, okay, so she asked like questions like, so did my black friends like experience slavery? And she was like, well, they didn't, but I'm sure like family members, if they've been here for a long time, probably did. And she was like, okay, well, do brown people experience slavery and like stuff like that? And they had to explain like, yes, and like they explained the context of that. And then she was like, so am I safe? And she's like, she's 4.
Dang.
And said that. And so that's like something like, I was watching that and I was like, oh man, like my future children are probably gonna have questions about that. Like kids aren't oblivious to this. They're a sponge and they notice things and they're naturally curious. So like they're gonna ask those hard questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I guess one of the things is like with us, I mean, we grew up with that and we had those. I know for me, and Ray and I have talked about this a lot, but like walking through the store with your parents, knowing that I look more like one parent and not like the other.
Yeah.
And getting those stares and people automatically assuming things about us, like that my dad doesn't speak Spanish when he speaks it fluently, but he looks more black. And then my mom's more white passing, so they also think she doesn't speak Spanish. And so like navigating that and people being like, well, your mom's white, and I'm like, no, she's
It's like, oh, so is this like your nanny? You're like, nah, this is my mom. Like,
yo, we did not have money for
yeah.
it. Do you mean my grandma?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, do I look that rich?
Yeah.
Wow. I'm like.
I know, that's what my jacket's for.
But yeah, no, these are very important, questions that I always not fear, but I always like get concerned of like thinking about, especially with like future kids, of just like a 3-year-old tugging my like leg and being like, am I gonna be okay? And I'm like, like, what do you mean? Because that's a very, especially right now with like a politically like hot topic as like, racism. This is a very good conversation to go into with your children. But a lot of people they kind of want to protect them and kind of be like, oh, they don't need to see that right now. It's like, you know, as
But
a
they're
3-year-old,
going
they're,
to.
yeah, exactly, like, even in the play yard, even in like a schoolyard, you know, they're still experiencing that with like bullying and like even teachers that may like,
Yeah.
you know, prefer some students over the others, and it's just like such a discussion that needs to be confronted right then and there so that they can know, you know, what's going on in the world.
Yeah.
Or what's going on in their world. Yeah.
So, Meredith and I both have partners right now. Ray is single out here.
Hey, that's not a.
Yeah.
We can cut
You
that.
can email us at mbsacdenver@gmail.com if you have any inquiries.
I just got a fresh haircut.
Yeah,
We're good
he's
to
going to
go.
a wedding this weekend, so
No.
if you know,
If
he
you
needs
wanna-
a wedding date. Wait, no, he has a wedding date.
No.
Oh, he needs a wedding
Yeah,
date.
if you want to go cross country.
Yeah, to Virginia. Anyways, we're getting off topic.
Are you paying for the flight? Just wondering.
I am. So, jump on in. Like,
He can carry you in the suitcase.
Yeah.
Anyways, we still need to graduate before we can anybody. So, but even just like with me and my partner talking, and like me personally, I don't plan on having kids soon, but there's already these discussions that we're having about raising a family and what that's going to look like. So my partner's Nigerian right now, and what's your partner?
My partner's white.
Yeah, and so.
Yeah. So from my end, there's a lot of that, like, I don't see color kind of talk, which we're working on.
Yeah.
And his family's white too, so it's like, you know, his parents have never experienced racism in the 50s and 60s in Brooklyn, which is a very different experience than my parents.
Yeah.
Grew up
In
New York
Brooklyn?
City. Yeah. Especially my dad who looks very Filipino in Brooklyn. I mean,
yeah.
it's very, very different. So I'm always thinking about, like, and no matter what our kids look like, if our kids look white, because I know I'm white passing, and then with a white dad, I mean, who knows what they're gonna look like.
Yeah.
So for me, it's just important for them to be aware and to understand that racism exists and that it's important to understand and be an advocate, and but to not be blind to it.
Yeah.
Because
I know for me, like, even just thinking about that, like, if me and my partner do decide to have children together, like, he's very dark skinned and I'm, I guess, light skinned. Yeah, I'm light skinned. I shouldn't say I guess. I'm light skinned. Yeah. But like, already navigating that, I like have already thought, I'm like, okay, so my children are probably gonna have darker skin than I do, but probably lighter skin than he does.
Yeah.
And so automatically my mind went to the grocery store and walking around the grocery store, and I feel like I might have an easier time with it than he would, just because of my own experience with my parents and stuff like that. Like, my mom is a very, 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 very light skinned, like white passing, like I mentioned before. But since I was so much like closer to the skin color of my dad, like it was like there was no question that I was his child.
Yeah.
And so I feel like with me, I don't know why I think like I'm gonna have an easier time with it, but I think because I've already lived through it and stuff, I will be able to have more of that claim, and kind of be like, no, these are my children, and it kind of helps because I'm not white passing, because like, I mean, the spectrum with like darker skin color, like my kids might end up your color or they might end up his color.
Yeah.
Like that's the other thing too. So what if I do have a child that's like dark skin like him, and then people are like, oh, is that like your kid's friend or something like that, and like how am I gonna handle that situation? or
that's a big component too.
Yeah.
As a parent, how are you going to figure it all out?
Right.
Too.
And I keep saying like I'm gonna handle it like easier because I went through it, but I really don't know until I'm in that situation. And like, what are we gonna, like, I think another thing is like family.
Yeah.
I mean, we can have a whole episode about like family and how that's gonna play a role, because I already know my family has very strong opinions about our culture. Especially the Mexican side of the family, and and his family is very strong in the Nigerian culture. I mean, his parents are immigrants from Nigeria, and so he's first generation American. I'm second generation American,
Yeah.
and so we've also both had very different experiences with that, and so like. I don't know, man.
That's a lot of roots, man, yeah.
I just went down a spiral a little bit.
I think one component as a future parent that we need to understand, and I hope everyone's listening if you are a parent, is that it's not going to be easy and it's not going to be perfect. I know that's the whole mantra of like being a parent of like, oh, everything's going to be perfect and my kids are going to eat like vegetarian, green beans for the rest of their lives and it's going to be candy and rainbows. And no, it's not. You're going to have these awkward situations that are going to happen at random, like a grocery store where someone like calls out your kid and they're like, hey, are you like babysitting? And your kid's going to be like, why did
That's my mom.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like, why did they ask that? That's when you're going to be like, all right, hold on to your horses, kid. Like,
Yeah.
And just kind of have that discussion. But I think the best way to approach it is by approaching it in any way possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, it's going to be hard, it's going to be weird, but it's supposed to be like that. Like, 'cause you've had these conversations with your partners, I'm assuming. Like, how was that conversation?
Like, in what sense do you mean? Like,
Of like, how, like, a scenario of like you guys walking down like a movie theater and like he's talking to some friends, you're talking to other friends, like, if someone would ask you, like, oh, are you guys dating? Like, how would you feel?
like if someone like asked if me and my partner were dating.
Yes.
I don't think I've had that too much, and I think it's because of how I phenotypically look. Since I phenotypically do have a lot of strong black features,
Yeah.
and he's Nigerian, but people automatically just assume he's black.
Yeah.
Out here, and so like I don't think I've had a question like that with him in particular, but I have had that question more with past relationships. When I did date a white guy and I did date just a Mexican guy, and people being like, so you're together?
Yeah.
And I'm like, yes, we're together. I've had people think that when me and my partner were together, when we went to the Minnesota State Fair, we were sitting and we just came just us two, and this guy was like, oh, are you all together? And it was like 3 other black people that were sitting next to us, and I was like, no, no, we're not. We're not even talking with them. We're not facing them or anything like that. But they just assumed that we were all together. I've had that happen more recently, but how I felt with the past relationships, I was like, why do you think that's so weird? And maybe it's because of like I've seen my parents, and I'm like, it's not weird. Like I have parents that don't look like each other at all, and they're dating and they're married and they've had 3 kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, oh gosh, it's like, you think about today, people aren't gonna have an issue with it. But then I had my first, experience in Denver where someone had called me a racial slur, referring to me as my partner's racial slur. I don't think I'm allowed to say it on here, but
You can.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're in college.
Go ahead.
okay, you're Asian bitch. Okay, so that's like the first, and I was so shocked, and my reaction was like, when I was alone, was to like cry out of frustration, just because I was like, this is still happening right now, but yeah it does, I hate to say it, but it's gonna continue.
Yeah.
So yeah, again, those discussions, approaching what's uncomfortable, getting comfortable with uncomfortable discussions with your kids, just so they're prepared.
Yeah. Have you experienced anything like that?
Yeah. And it's mostly from my mom, which it hurts me to say, but sometimes my mom can be very just not aware of what she says sometimes, and so I'll bring like a friend over, or I'll like introduce her to like one of my like, white partners, and she'd be like overly excited about it, and I'm like, Mom, like cut it. Because it'll be like, she'll like play into the whole like, oh, this is her like white girlfriend, like this is so great, and and I'm like, why are you putting her on a pedestal, Mom? Like, you didn't do that to the last partner. And like, we had a discussion about it, and she basically, like, long story short, she was like, I just want to make sure that your partner is safe, whether you're with her or not. And like that, like literally like opened my eyes, and I was like, oh, Mom, you really that hurts. But at the same time, it makes sense that she would want me to have a partner that, like, even if I wasn't with her, she would be protected in any area that she would.
Mm-hmm.
But it sucks that my mom is like focused on the phenotype area. That's, you know, the more component. But
Yeah.
you know, I've had that, you know, uncomfortable conversation with her, and, you know, definitely with my mom as well. And I think, like, even as I grew, she started to see that, like, you know, who I was hanging out with and who she didn't want me to hang out with as much, or, you know, certain things that she would, like, catch me on and be like, hey, like, don't sleep over at that guy's house. And I'm like, yeah, but this is my bro. And she's like, yeah, but I understand, but, you know, just make sure you don't get hurt. And I'm like, at a sleepover? Like, all we're gonna do is, like, pillow fight and play PS2. Like, you know, like, and it never, like, clicked for me until I had that conversation. But, you know, it's always in a parent's mind of just, like, how's my kid gonna be protected? Like, how's my kid gonna be in this situation? Like, and I feel as though, even though she didn't have that, like, one-on-one conversation with me, it started popping out later on in my years that she was like, oh, I always kept an eye on you, just making sure that you weren't doing this or that, just so, you know, because you're you. And I'm like, keep going, Mom. Like,
Yeah.
You're me, but, like, what am I? And she's like, well, you're not, you know, my skin tone. And I was like, ah.
There it is.
There it is, you know. And so I had to pry it out of her, but, you know, as a parent, she just wanted, she got there. And she just wanted me to be safe, and she just wanted those who I cared about to be safe as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think something, like, if anyone is out there in an interracial relationship, and let's say you are more serious and thinking about having kids, or let's say you do have kids already, I think a crucial piece that people forget about with having children that are more than one race or ethnicity is that there is going to be a lot of negotiations.
Yeah.
A lot of talking about, like, I've talked about just figuring out a name. That's one huge thing that, and, like, luckily, like, my dad was Black and Mexican, and so, like, we had the Mexican side, so my name is all Latin based.
Yeah.
It's all Latin based. Alma Rosa Ramos. Like, it doesn't get any more. It doesn't get any more than that. But, like, my sister's name is Vanessa Michelle, and my brother's name is Michael Aaron or Michael Aron, depending on who says it. But, like, even thinking about, like, with my partner, like, his name is Okechukwu.
Oh.
And all of his family has very, like, Nigerian, Igbo-based names.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking about it now. I'm like, okay, so do we give them, like, a Latin first name and a Nigerian middle name, or is it vice versa? Do some of the kids have the Nigerian first name and some of them have the Latin first name? But then are people going to be confused and be like, wait, that's your brother, that's your sister, or whatever it might be? And, like,
because there's a lot of significance behind the name in itself.
That's the thing. Like, every name has a meaning.
Yeah.
And so, and so, like, that's, and we can talk about names forever, and that's just one factor about it. We can go into religion, and if people are religious, in the split stories again, we talked about getting married in a Catholic church, and both of the people have to be Catholic.
Ooh.
And you have to sign a thing saying that you're going to raise your kids Catholic.
Yikes.
In order to get married in the Catholic Church. Like, it's like a whole big thing. And what if your partner doesn't want to do that? And then your whole side of the family is going to be like, that is Catholic, is like, what are you doing?
Yeah, you know?
Yeah, so...
There's so many components to this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we were just talking, before the show started, we were just talking about adoption, because my partner and I are looking into adoption, and we can't adopt from the Philippines because we have to have a letter from a priest saying that or a pastor, that we've been attending church for the past 5 years, and we're agnostic, so...
Yeah.
But that's, like, I mean, my dad is just so over the moon about, like, adopting from the Philippines, since, you know, we talked about adoption, and it's just like, now I have to...
Tell him.
Yeah.
Hopefully he's not listening to this podcast.
If there's any pastors out there that want to hook us up,
yeah.
let us know, you know?
Can slide you a whopping $5 bills, because that's, like, all I have.
I got it crisp right here.
But yeah, like, I don't think people think about the negotiations that you have to make with a partner in regards to that, and, like, even just, and I even think about being in school, in elementary school, and like people telling me, you're not this because you don't do this. And like
Yeah.
my parents were like, no, you're this, you're this, you're this. But like it's hard for a kid to truly accept that when everyone else is telling them
You're not.
otherwise.
Yeah.
And so like, and I haven't even had kids and I'm already like, my heart's like
Yeah,
already beating
yeah.
fast and I'm like, my future children are
Yeah.
gonna have to go through so much. But like to realize we can tell our kids a lot of things, but they're also gonna experience the world when we're not there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh man.
I know.
What is that thing I said? Is the home nurturing?
Yeah. Yeah.
True.
And that's a huge like factor with it, and you can't and even like with the bring back like the racism thing, if your child is not just white, there's probably a good chance that they're going to experience some type of racism, even if they're half
Yeah.
white
Yeah.
or mostly white. Someone's going to find that
One
little thing that's
flaw or-
different
Yeah.
Yeah.
and run with it.
Yeah.
And if you are white, who has a
Mhm.
partner of color, not ignoring the racism
Exactly.
is really important.
Yeah. And
Say that
so
one more time. Say it like.
If you're white and you have a partner of color, don't ignore the racism.
oh yeah.
Just now. But yeah, no, I totally 100% agree with that. And like, it's all about communication with your partner about all these things, like religion, names, language, even going into that. Like, it's all things that you as a non-white identity person and as a white identifying person need to have a discussion with.
And then also having that discussion with your families.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because there is going to be times where you're going to grandma's house or your aunt's house or something like that, and like being like very clear to them, like if you do have, because I know I have family members who are not, or that are racist, like that
Yeah.
it's just, it is what it is.
Yeah.
And like going up to them and being like, you cannot tell this to my children. You cannot, because this is part of who they are.
Yeah.
And you telling them that this one side of them is not okay and the other one is better is not healthy for them.
It's not.
And you can tell them, oh, like I want you to tell them about our culture.
Yeah.
I want you to give them that richness and that genuineness, but you cannot bash the other side
Yeah.
in order to do that as well.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Almost like instead of like but, just like and statement.
Yes.
So you can honor like, you know, our culture and like hype it up and, you know, like let's have traditional meals and like speak the language, and at the same time you have to honor
Respect.
and respect my partner's culture, my partner's language, my partner's like identity.
Because
So
that is also my child's culture.
Exactly.
And it also becomes my culture
Yeah.
and identity. Like when you're with a partner, like that's another thing. Like I may not be Nigerian, but I am also expected to learn about Nigerian culture.
Exactly.
And vice versa.
Yeah.
He's expected to learn Mexican culture from me and like black culture from me. Although we both experience that.
In like a somewhat like Venn diagram.
It's,
like,
yeah, no, we can. He's African, but he's black here. I'm part black, but I'm not all the way black,
Yeah.
and like all that. But yeah, oh man, no.
And that's where the family trees get so beautiful
Mhm.
and complex. And you know, in our field, we do the genograms. Like, they're
Oh yeah.
it's a
Oh,
beautiful.
I'm on the HESA track. Did not have to do that. I just saw the group chat
Yeah.
and everybody like crying about that, and I was like,
A lot of circles and squares, people.
Yeah.
If you don't know what genogram is, it's a just structural family tree, but it goes deep into, you know, your past generations and your future generations and your pets. You know, it's yeah, no, there's a symbol for pets. Yeah.
Communication pattern.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's a pretty cool thing if you want to try it out, but don't do it as a homework assignment.
Yeah. And I think we're talking about a lot of like, I don't want to say the negativity, but the barriers and the struggles that come with raising or being multiracial and biracial or multi-ethnic and bi-ethnic. But there's also, like you said, it becomes a beautiful tree. I mean, like, the amount of things that I've experienced because I have both sides is incredible. Like, the food that I have, the food is incredible that I have, and like, and learning from both sides, like, what was the traditional way, and learning how my grandma had to change from how she cooked here to how she cooked in Mexico, and then like the same thing with my grandma on my other side, rest in peace, but she, like, how she cooked on the farm compared to how she cooked later on in life and things like that, and learning about like who this recipe came from and where it got passed down from, and like all this stuff. Like, food is one thing, music is another thing. Like, the amount of things I learn, and like in my opinion, I feel like I grew up with such like an open awareness about people. And that there were different people, and all people are fine and good, and it's kind of skewed now, but like I was such a lovely little child that believed everyone was good, and then I, grew up.
It's like 2 years later.
Yeah, but that's such like a true statement. I'm so glad that I grew up with the beauty of both of my cultures, and learning to appreciate both of those cultures, and although it was hard growing up, the process that I went through to be like where I am now, of being able to truly accept both, is such a rewarding and gratifying process.
Agreed.
Mm-hmm. Man, I can't say it better than that. So
Well, get the degree.
Give her the Emmy, guys. But yeah, just to end off on that, like, what would you want to say to any listeners who are thinking about having a child, about to adopt, just kind of having these thoughts in mind? I would just like to say, like, have this discussion with your partner. Never be in fear of like growing a family of just unique colors and unique like flavors. It's a beautiful union of two people. It's going to be a beautiful union of like your cultures, your histories, your generations. So yeah, what do you guys want to say?
I mean, I think that's really well said, and it's going to be hard to navigate and have those discussions, but also, like, even I'm trying to change my mindset to, I get to oscillate between two different cultures. I get to do that, and your kids will get to do that, and it'll be really hard, but it'll be a really amazing experience that we wouldn't trade.
Yeah. Absolutely. Definitely what you both said. I mean, it's going to be a very big learning experience for everyone, because there is going to be, I already know that there's going to be barriers that I'm not going to be able to predict, or questions that my kids are going to ask that I'm not going to be able to like prepare for, and just kind of have to be on the spot for it, or be like, grab my partner and be like, such and such said this, how are we going to address this? But that's also just, I don't know, we're continuously learning, and I love learning, so I'm like, it's also exciting. Like, I get to, like you said, like, experience both cultures and teach it to a tiny human, and just kind of be like, you are all of this, and embrace all of this, and really give them that ground to stand on. I think that's our big thing, like, with just being like, hey, I went through this too. It was different, but I went through this too, and just know that you are all of this. So.
Nice.
Well, thank you for coming, man. This was awesome discussion. And thank you everyone who tuned in to our episode. Next week we are going to be talking, this time, this is for real. I made a wrong announcement 2 weeks ago saying that our next episode was hair, and it wasn't for another 2 weeks. So next episode is actually talking about hair and what that's like, and I'll break down all the curl patterns and all that for everyone on here. But yes, thank you again, Meredith, for coming on the show. And definitely, if you all have any questions or concerns or anything like that, DM us on the Instagram. That's MBSA, Mary, Baker, Sammy. Aloha. CU Denver. That's our Instagram handle. DM us on there. Email us at mbsacudenver@gmail.com, or if you get into the CU Denver CII Instagram, you can IG message us on there if you do have any topics or are interested in being a guest or anything like that if you're on CU Denver's campus. But thank you again for listening to
What Are You?